Hello and welcome to Fall Through, your source for deep conversations about technology, software, and computing. I'm Chris, also known as Scriptable, and on today's episode, we have another great intro by Angelica, so I'm going to let her handle that. But Ron Evans is joining us, and for our supporters, we have some really great bonus chapters, so if you're not a supporter already, make sure you head on over to fallthrough.fm/subscribe and sign up today. If you're not following us on social media, please give us a follow there. And if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like button and smash that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you can get notified right when we ship episodes. And with that, let's get into the show.
Hello, and welcome to Fall Through. Today, we are going to be talking about a plethora of things, from AI boom cycle. Yes, we're going to continue to talk about AI. We're going to talk about Tiny Go. We're going to talk about computer vision. We're going to talk about conferences, travel. We're talking about all these many different things, not because we couldn't decide on a topic, but because we have the fantabulously fabulous Ron Evans with us, and we just wanted to take advantage and pick his brains on absolutely everything. So without further ado, before I pass over to the wonderful Ron Evans to give us a little intro, for those of you who have not had the pleasure, I'm going to introduce my marvelously magnificent Matthew Sanabria, my co-host, my partner in crime. Hello, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing? I feel good. Coming off of 4 weeks of travel, but it's fine. And fine. I gotta be
Powering through. We're in our 3 time zones today, so thank you for getting up early, and thank you for staying up somewhat more late than you might have usually, Ron.
It's just the middle of the afternoon. I am excellent. It's great to be here with you. Also, it's great to see you again, although not as wonderful as real life. It was really fun being all together at GopherCon in New York City, which is your home stomping grounds.
Yes.
And also it was fun to listen to the episode that you recorded about conferences and GopherCon and things in general. So that's why I wore my t-shirt here. Shout out to GopherCon.
Oh, love that. Love that. For you lovely listeners, Ron is sporting the GopherCon t-shirt from this year. Well,
wear the colors.
You what?
Wear the colors, that's how I do it.
Yeah. Love it. I should have worn, actually, we don't have Fall Through t-shirts. I feel like next time, maybe I can graffiti Fall Through on my t-shirt.
Yeah, we're gonna need to get some swag at some point. We'll figure that out.
DIY. We'll make it work. Great. Okay, so Ron, I'm gonna ask you to introduce yourself to the wonderful listeners who may not have encountered you in their day-to-day lives.
Yes, so I am Dead Program. Some people call me Ron Evans, I guess. But that's not as important. All of the online places that I haunt, frequent, hang out in, and just generally, exist within, I am Dead Program. And I wasn't always Dead Program, of course, but I'm from the generation of handles. My handle evolved, but I've been Dead Program for most of the internet age. So that's the important parts. And I am a technologist for hire. That is my actual title. You can hire me for your technology. I have a small boutique consultancy called the Hybrid Group. And I've worked on a lot of open source in the world of hardware, ranging from microcontrollers and Arduinos to computer vision to robotics to things that defy definition. And I've done a lot of it in Go for pretty much the whole time I've known about Go. And I've been fortunate enough to give a few talks about some of these projects that I've been involved with. And so run a few hardware hack sessions that you've participated in, which is sort of like a musical jam session is to music, a hardware hack session is to hardware. There's no winners or losers. It's not like a hackathon. You just come, hang out, and play with some of the toys and get your hands on some of the amazing blinky LEDs that you talked about with Patricio Withingslow in the recent episode, which I also listened to. And actually, I was just talking to Patricio last night, who I work with pretty closely on the Tiny Go project, among a bunch of other people, humans, cyborgs, and other sentients. So
Well, I've
yes,
got to,
here I am, and it's great to finally be here. I'm not nowhere near one of the first people on Fall Through. Now, that's not your fault. Angelica, you invited me very early on, and just because of my crazy travel schedule and attempts to do consulting work to make money and all the other things, review many open source contributions to many projects, I apologize for showing up so late in the game, but it's great because you have an amazing body of work and you've had some amazing guests, quite a few of whom are friends of mine, like quite a few, actually, just in no particular order. Patricio, Evan Phoenix, Mitch Hashimoto, more people who just don't pop in the mind right now. One of your co-hosts I've spent a fair amount of time with back in the Ruby days, Steve Klobnik. So I feel like I'm already kind of a part of your show, just not, I've been like an invisible presence.
I love it. We should get you on more. I feel like you've plugged all these episodes, all these guests, and I promise we did not sync on this before, listeners. This is just coming straight off the noggin for Ron. So we are going to talk about TinyGo. Of course, we couldn't not. But we're going to start by talking a little bit about the hype topic, AI ML, because as we chatted about previously when we had the pleasure of talking in person, you were around well before then. You've seen technologies come and go, the hype cycle come and go. So I feel like you can offer our listeners a really unique perspective as someone who both has seen it from start to finish and where we are today, but also as someone who I know has done quite a bit of thinking in this space. And I think has quite a few interesting ideas, if I do say so myself. So maybe we can just start with a very basic question, which is like, Ron, at a high level, like, what is your view on this hype on AI at the moment?
Wow. Well, I certainly feel like quoting some classic cinematic, all of this will vanish like tears in the rain, maybe, or perhaps taking from another one, all of this has happened before. All of this will happen again. That's mashing up, both Blade Runner and Battlestar Galactica, the reboot, for those of you who are not as completely obsessed with the cinematic representation of, I guess, artificial beings as they are in the movies, So I think, of course, that it's very interesting to see such an enormous social impact. Like many of the times in the past, which I'll give you my bona fides in a minute about why on earth you should maybe listen to me, although maybe you shouldn't also. Let me throw that out there, just because. But, it's very interesting, like normal people out in the world talk about these things. And in various AI booms of the past, it was a very niche thing. Of course, computing itself is a very mainstream thing now. So that has an enormous impact outside of our little cloistered world of technologists and aficionados and professionals, or, whatever we're trying to call ourselves. But I will give you, as I will put it, a firsthand account from the second AI winter. So back last century, many years ago, when Dead Program was very young, was not even Dead Program yet, had a different handle that shall remain anonymous for reasons. Anyway, so I was a guy who was extremely interested in technology, and in particular, this burgeoning area of what we might call artificial intelligence. Now, a term which is quite a misnomer. But anyway, back in those days, the realm of so-called AI was dominated by a few players like Symbolics or Lisp Machines Incorporated, who had extremely expensive hardware that was required in order to use any of this. Now, keep in mind, I came from a very humble, middle-class type upbringing. I did not have my own computer for my childhood. I had to use computers at school or friends' houses or stand in Radio Shack until they kicked me out again. So a lot of this was very theoretical for my young mind, simply because of not having access to any of this. Of course, until Macintosh, actually even before that, I was trying to run a Lisp emulator written in AppleSoft BASIC on the Apple II when I was in high school, believe it or not. But of course, it didn't really work. Anyhow, Macintosh created a whole new genre of thinking about information, just because if you looked at the green screen, amber screen terminal interfaces, and then you looked at a Macintosh, it very much looked like a computer from the future. So this other thing came out running on Mac called HyperCard. And you may have talked about this before. I know Steve Klobnik is a big fan. And it was another way of trying to collect knowledge and information, like the web before the web. And it's very much gone but not forgotten, simply because a lot of the ideas it introduced about letting normal-ish people create their own software that could communicate knowledge that they had and wanted to share with other folks. So when I first saw HyperCard, I thought, oh, this is a great way to create expert systems. Now, expert systems was the term that was in use for what we called AI. It was trying to take human expertise and condense it into some type of software that you could give to other non-expert people, and they could use it to do something that they otherwise could not do. Very much human empowerment, what they might have called intelligence amplification in an earlier age as well. Something much more human-centric. Anyway, I got really interested in HyperCard. I created this software, which actually was an expert system development environment in HyperCard called HyperX. And I wrote an article that was published in Byte magazine in January of 1990, which I actually wrote like almost 2 years earlier. It took a while between the time you finish an article and the time it would make print back in those days. So I actually gave a link to Chris with a few other links, just because somehow all of the back issues of Byte magazine are now available online in the searchable index. And that was the only reason I looked this up recently, because I haven't really thought about any of this stuff in quite a while, because but I just found it interesting. Anyway, it was about essentially how you could use how hypermedia systems, hypertext systems, and expert systems were two sides of the same coin, but they were trying to do the same thing, which was encapsulate human knowledge in some format. There were a bunch of academic papers ended up being written, not by me. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a technologist. But they were written about HyperX and being used in various genres. It was unfortunately a very low-priced product, right? All the source was included for you to use because open source didn't exist yet. But I was charging like $49 for this thing that, high-end companies that were selling to the Department of Defense were charging like $4,000 for. Naturally, I didn't make a lot of money, but it was acquired by universities all over the world, a MITRE Corporation, U.S. Department of the Navy. If they were doing anything with AI, they were checking out HyperX, if nothing else, as an inexpensive way for them to actually deploy this stuff. And some of the ideas made it into a future version of HyperCard, this thing called Chart Expert, that was basically, take your data and figure out which chart is the most appropriate to present it in. Stuff which is just features of Excel and other spreadsheets now, but back in the day, that was AI, right? Anyway, sure enough, like many overhyped things, of course, it died. And sort of the poster child for this is something called Cyc, CYC. So Cyc was a project out from a guy named Doug Lanatt. It was massively funded by everybody who was anybody again, Department of Defense money primarily, but also all the major corporations. And the idea was to create a single knowledge base that incorporated all of human knowledge and could then be used in order to solve any problem. And they spent decades on it. They spent many, many millions of dollars. And, well, obviously it changed everything because we're all using it all now, right? No, it didn't. It didn't work. So in any case, those are kind of my bona fides about some of the things I've seen, my friends, and some of the eerie parallels. Custom hardware required to run it. Check. Massive investment into a thing that's got to be around someday and incorporate all of human knowledge. Check. But let's flip it over. A quote that I've often loved is from Paul Sappho. Sorry, it's not from Paul Sappho. Sorry, forgot the provenance confusion. The quote, though, is in my mind. The quote is, we have a tendency to overestimate the short-term benefits and underestimate the long-term impacts of technology. It's from the Strategic Research Institute, another one of those massively military-funded think tanks that spent a lot of money on trying to figure out the implications of AI and technology. So
this is saying Roy Amara.
Amara's Law, thank you. Amara's Law. Sappho's another guy with some interesting quotes, but not relevant to this conversation. So Amara's Law, I think really applies here. I would say predictions of the demise of the requirement of having humans in the loop are quite premature. On the other hand, poo-pooing it all and saying, oh, it's complete nonsense and meaningless, I won't even look at it, is a bit immature. My own take is I will use anything that I find to do whatever it is I want. Okay, I'm not going to put a label on it because somebody else. At the same time, I do recognize the limitations of things and also the repercussions of some of them. Certainly, it's an important thing to keep in mind. The classic paper, Stochastic Parrots, which you talked about in the other show, Timlit Gebru and other authors, the one that got Timlit fired from Google. And if you actually read the paper, it's a very short paper. Okay, academic papers I do not publish, but I do read a few from time to time. So I read this one just because it was a paper that got, so much attention. Like, wow, the controversy, like fired from Google for academic, wishy-washy, like not meeting the academic standards of Google research or whatever. So I read the paper. First of all, I was like, it's a very short paper, relatively speaking. Also very, classic. I didn't have time to write you a short paper, so I wrote a long one. I mean, this is well-written paper. Yeah, you can actually read it and understand it as a thinking human. So I read it and I thought, wait, you got fired over this? It's a very reasonable approach to thinking about things like how much energy and computation is required to get a particular result. What is the provenance of training data? What are the impacts, as far as social impacts, of these technologies? So it made me think of the contrast of that and the OpenAI thing. Now, I'm really not a fan of OpenAI. They're not open, first of all. But the reason in particular, I think, to pick on them, they're not the only ones guilty, but they're particularly guilty of a thing, which is when ChatGPT came out. I'm ranting, but I'm going to keep going.
No, you're good. You're good.
When ChatGPT came out, you might remember that before it came out, they said, we really don't know if we're going to release this because this technology is so powerful, it could destabilize human society. So we're genuinely concerned about putting it out. Does anyone remember this? And of course, they did release it. But when I saw it, I kept thinking, is this like the Viagra commercial of technology? Like the medical advice that they're giving you at the end that's supposed to be a warning. But this is the corporate version. So all these companies are hearing this, like this could be very dangerous. And CEOs are like, oh, I want this. I want exclusive. I want it now. I want it deployed tomorrow. And of course, that was ChatGPT 2. We've seen the hype cycle is only increased, dramatically. But there's very much of a bifurcation as far as the way that people perceive, these kind of automated reasoning technologies. The people who love them very much, and then the people who absolutely loathe them. And Cory Doctorow, the author. So if you don't know Cory Doctorow, he's a really amazing author of both science fiction and / speculative fiction, as well as a journalist and blogger, longtime supporter member of the EFF, and just generally cool person, where I was lucky enough to also speak at a conference in Germany a bunch of years ago. Somewhere I've got a signed copy, I think, of Little Brother. Anyway, so Cory wrote a great quote, which was like, I have to find it. I'm sorry. I have to find it because it's just too good, because it really states oh so well. Let me see if I can find it real fast, because it was too good.
Ron is a man of many words, many of which are attributed to other great men and women.
Everything I know, I learned from someone else, probably, whether I remember it or not. So the quote was, this, I think, is the explanation for the paradox of AI. The AI users who are being immiserated and precaritized by bosses who have been convinced to fire their colleagues and pile their work on the terrorized survivors of the layoffs hate the AI in English, IA in Spanish, because it makes their life worse in every way. So that quote, that's the quote right there. It really does explain it. If you're being threatened because of all of the, can I say identification on this? It's in the Merriam-Webster. Cory Doctorow is the person who invented that term, as far as I know, and it refers to things getting worse and worse over time in order to make more and more money from it, which of course is very counter to my generation's thinking about technology. Like, we expected it to get better and better and cheaper over time. That the whole idea of open source is the nominal cost of software approaches zero, so power to the people, right on. Of course, that's not what happened. Anyhow,
and that could be applied to so many things. That even credit card fees. Why is it that we have a large volume of credit card transactions and it's more expensive to process credit card? We're in a weird spot with technology.
But Kent Beck said something very recently. Kent Beck is one of the original authors of the Agile Manifesto, and one of the only ones who has not embarrassed themselves terribly subsequently with just awful takes and books and things. Like, I'm not going to name names. I only name things I like, generally. I try real hard to be affirmative and instead of negative. But Kent Beck had a great blog post recently talking about programming deflation, which is talking about code generation. And I know a lot of people who are very anti-code generation. Then there's a bunch of people who are totally like, code generation makes programmers obsolete. My take on it is quite different, but back to Kent, his thing talking about code and the fact that we could generate so much more of it now, it's basically saying, his quote is, in a world of abundant, cheap code, what becomes scarce? Understanding, judgment, the ability to see how pieces fit together, the wisdom to know what not to build. So that, in very few words, I think, states, I'm just going to go with Kent Beck on this one, the ability to think critically about whatever it is you're trying to solve as a problem is not something that is eliminated by any form of generation of anything. If these things make it possible, I know I talked about this with you, Matthew, when I saw you in Pasadena, I think. The idea that new types of applications can be created by people who previously couldn't create them at all is, I think, incredibly empowering. I'm a guy who's like down with the professional programming priesthood. But aren't you a programmer? Yeah, so what? This is not about getting rid of programmers. It's about making it possible for people to create programs that otherwise could not even exist and to solve some of their own problems. Now, confusing that with let's fire the whole programming department of this major mission critical thing of the big company, that's a bunch of crazy management speak about trying to exploit a loophole to make some short-term profits, probably at a significant long-term expense. And I've been seeing a bunch of things popping up in feeds about consultants specializing in fixing people's vibe-coded applications. Now, I just want to say, I see no distinguishing characteristic of that is different from any of the other work I have ever done as a consultant to go in and help a company, even with very good people, simply because any piece of software after a certain amount of time and lines of code becomes legacy by definition because you are using it today. Therefore, it's no longer just the new point of, proof of concept. It is the production system. So could GUI code generators, remember those? Did they eliminate the need for designers in software? No, not at all. They did make it possible for some people to create some of their own apps and also for the baseline quality of apps to occasionally improve, although not always. So, I think it's a false dichotomy to say programming becomes obsolete. It's also a false thing to say none of these tools are useful at all. But none of this is a substitute for actual thinking.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I'm reading the blog post by Kent that you linked or that you mentioned, and I'm reading the quote that you read out. And even just the last part of like the wisdom to know what not to build. Like that's there's a lot in there that people probably overlook, because that involves you understanding what problem you're solving. That involves you understanding what the users of your product are doing and what they want. And you need to know how to say no, because it's unfortunate too, because we live in a world where we think that we can just throw technology at every problem, and every problem is like we have this technology hammer and every problem is the proverbial nail. And we rarely take the time to say, like, should I even do this? Should I just not build this? Should I just not do this thing? And we're such in a rush to throw AI or throw code or throw technology at these problems that's like, is anyone looking at this? You know what I mean? Is anyone taking a step back and thinking about this holistically? Very easy to think that way.
Angelica, what do you think? You're a practitioner.
I mean, my view is very much, and I think, Matthew, you've heard me say this before, these tools feel like just another tool in the tool set of a good software engineer, of a good product manager, etc. And I think the real art is kind of, as we've been talking about, knowing when to use it and how to use it in a way that makes your work higher quality, better, and takes away the more mundane pieces that are very time consuming, while allowing you to spend your brain power on the more creative parts. I also think that there's, at this point, like a trade-off decision between, okay, I can get something to generate code for me, but then what's the trade-off for me having to go through and read it and make sure it actually works and not actually understand why it's decided to structure this thing in this way. The amount of times that I've heard stories of engineers who have generated code, pushed it to production, there's been a bug, and then they get asked, oh, like, what's wrong? Like, why does it work this way? They're like, I don't know. I didn't write it. Which I think is hugely problematic. So I think it's, for me, and it's something I'm trying to work out right now, and I know many of my colleagues are, is how can we have these tools help us as opposed to hinder us? Because I do think that ultimately they're going to be helpful. Ultimately, I think they're great. I use Gemini every single day, and it definitely makes my life better, more efficient, more effective. Like I can just word vomit into it. I can insert some basic information about my data schemas and be like, hey, can you make me a SQL query to query for XYZ? And it will do it effectively given context. So I love it. But I think if used in the wrong way, it can be hugely detrimental. And also, I think you see a lot of people using these tools as opposed to actually understanding and being critical and understanding the why, and therefore aren't prompting it in the right way to solve the right problem because they don't know what the problem is. So,
oh, yeah. Wow. Well, you hit on a bunch of things that I got excited about. The first one is when you say reading code. Okay. So I will venture to say, I've said this before, and lots of people have said this, reading code is so much more important than writing code. In fact, writing code is not even that important compared to reading code, because most of the job of being a professional software person is to read the code, whether you wrote it, it was generated, it was written by some other team member, collaborator, some open source code. Reading code is so much more important than writing code. Like if I was going to interview someone for a working position, I would say, let's read some code. And I wouldn't be like like an ambush. I'd be like, bring some code that we can read through. Code you wrote, code I wrote, code you found, any code. Let's just talk about some code together. Let's go through the code. That right there, it's like, you can't be an orchestral musician if you can't read music. You can't be a serious coder if you can't read code. Mm-hmm. That right there. Then another thing you mentioned about like the generating code and then goes to production, broken, I don't know. I would like to draw a parallel to, you're a manager, you hire some outsourced company because they were the cheapest one. You gave them some requirements that you'd written because like, oh, that tells you everything they need. They gave it, you put it in production, the thing broke, and you're like, oh my God, these consultants, what a bunch of hacks. And it's like, no, wait, hold on. Well, you gave them these incomplete instructions. They actually gave you something that worked at all. You should be amazed, So, I mean, it's very much of a parallel that, garbage in, garbage out. Actually specifying the solution in so much detail that it's complete. Well, that is maybe not even theoretically possible, but the closest thing to it would be perhaps code, like that programming language.
Yeah.
So, but like you were saying also, if you use these things tactically, they can be incredibly useful because very mundane tasks can be somewhat less painful. And maybe you did this in the past with a different form of code generation. Maybe you use templates, or maybe you use Swig or something. And you spent all this time to generate, Matthew's smiling because he's like, oh, Swig, oh man, like, oh my goodness. Swig is this, is a tool for basically generating code wrappers in a multitude of different languages using kind of an interface definition language that sort of makes it horrible in all output languages, in different ways, So, I mean, if you were using that and you expected everything to be just all peaches and cream, beautiful sunshine, rainbows, we're all happy, kumbaya, and you're like, you look at it, you're like, oh, whoa, oh my God. That is just like, my eyes are just crossed from reading that. So it's a very similar thing by whatever mechanism, if you're using a language model to generate some code, you don't read the code that generates, well, that's on you. But if you use a well-designed prompt and it makes it a lot easier to generate some code that you were going to generate anyway, maybe, I don't distinguish between that and some other code generation technique, And look, I know people who say you shouldn't use code coloration in your editor. And I think, you monsters, I could barely see. I need all the colors I can get. That's cool. You don't need color, like good for you. You read 2-point type and this tiny font and Vim, and I'm proud of you and I'm really happy, but I can't do it, man. I just can't do it. So anyway, it's an interesting time to be alive in the world of software. And the last thing I'll say on this is actually something that Jana Rackle online. So Jana was on the Go team, brilliant software developer, person, amazing, cool singer also. Saw her very briefly recently at GopherCon, and there was a panel discussion about Go and AI. Now, quick rant, they didn't really talk about the thing I wanted to hear, which was what are we going to do about the fact that there's not equivalent tooling in Go to all the tooling in Python for doing like fine tuning and training of models and such. But anyway, I don't want to go there. The thing that she said that I really thought was great was the interesting part of all the applications to be built that utilize intelligence as part of them to do something useful, not just about all this tooling stuff. And I was like, right on. Because that's really where my own thinking is. Like, we've only scratched the surface. And I'm not talking about just add a chat interface to an app and call it a day, right? In fact, chat interfaces themselves maybe are the totally wrong interface. Maybe no interface. It's literally no interface, adaptive interface, where it shows you what's actually needed. Things that are completely behind the scenes. Things that, help you later revise things, help you as part of a whole life cycle. But this sort of trivialization of like, okay, chat interface to this web app, boom, go. Like, that's a very that does not take into account a lot of human factors research about the way people use computers. And, that does not help the hype cycle to be locked into like another chatbot. But this time it's smart, really, we swear. Well, this brings up a word, epistemology. Epistemology, it's one of these long words, 50-cent word. I guess it's a $5 word with inflation. So epistemology is knowledge about knowledge. It's how we know what we know. It's trying to understand what is true, what is knowledge we have that's direct, what is knowledge we have that's by reference, what is knowledge we have that's inferred from other knowledge, what is knowledge we have on faith because someone else told us this information. So it's a very interesting thing it's considered in the realm of philosophy, but a lot of things that would historically, so advice, young person, go study philosophy. Remember that everyone told you a philosophy degree is useless? Well, I got news for you. It might be the best degree you could get. In a world where epistemological warfare is ongoing continuously, a literal assault on the nature of truth itself, whether conscious or unconscious. And this has been a, part of postmodernism, this idea that truth itself is something which is relative and not absolute, has implications outside of drinking wine and absinthe in more direct, can we give you advertising that causes you to think a certain way and makes you buy something? Or can we tell you information so that you can use it, but without actually assimilating it, so that you're not even a carrier, because it literally just you're like a pass-through. You're a carrier the way the network cable is a carrier in a router. So
you're replaceable. Literally, you're by definition, you're very replaceable there.
And a lot of the appeal of these systems to the sort of investor class is obviously you can fire a bunch of people, right? Now that's not actually true because well, I'm playing the long game, guys. The real long game. Okay, such a long. I'm skating to the puck in a game 3 seasons from now. Okay, that's how much in the future I am. So I've been working on this Rise of the Robots thing for a real long time, and I've been working on it in Go for a long time. So tell you all my secret plans. I've been telling everybody the whole time. Never made my secret plans have never been secret. I've been totally upfront about it. So Rise of the Robot, Gopher. So you needed 3 things in order to have this occur. All right. The first one is you need some type of physical computing system, some type of thing that can move motors, read from sensors, make actuators, make actual changes in the physical world, the real world, and that's what TinyGo is about. The second thing you need is some type of computer vision systems. Like the camera is the most adaptable, most multi-purpose sensor that we know. And we need some type of computer vision system for our robot in order so that it can see where it is and what's going on around it. So that's what GoCV and Wasm Vision are all about. And then the third thing is we need some type of automated reasoning system for our robot for it to be able to read from these sensors and use the computer vision system and then determine what are the next actions that have to be taken in order to do something in the real world. And that's what my little toy project Skynet is about. So I've got all the three things I need to build the robot gopher evolution. Finally, at last, the long game. It's, I hope the robots will keep me as a pet. I assume they will, just because, I'm very, entertaining and trainable. But originally I was a target, and then I got a promotion to battery changer, and that was a much better gig. All right, much better, survival, like in the workplace as a battery changer than a target. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, all those projects are real. TinyGo, I know you had Patricio Whittingslow had a great, talking about his real world industrial applications. I'm just going to refer people to that episode, because he really goes, he builds rockets and builds rocket engines and does genetic engineering and all kinds of amazing stuff with Go and TinyGo. I've done a few things myself, building battery factories and such. But usually I stick to talking about the fun parts just because as TinyGo evangelist, and spokesmodel, I, go out there to try to get people, first of all, just to know about it. So if you don't know about TinyGo, it's the Go programming language, but for the small places. You compile it. It's just the same Go. But now you can run it on tiny little microcontrollers like my GopherBot toy robotic gopher plushie. And I realize waving toys around does not help dissuade people from the idea that it's a toy language. Okay, now I get that, all right? But we're in the post-irony era, and my Gen Z colleagues have assured me I'm doing the right thing, so I'm just going to keep moving. But TinyGo, I am not the creator of the TinyGo project. The creator of TinyGo is a brilliant programmer from the Netherlands named Eike van Latem. And I'm the first follower, number 2 code committer, and the person who's willing to get on an airplane and fly to the other side of the world to, make blinky LEDs with people. But that's what it takes. If you want to start a movement, I don't know. Okay, I can't give you generic advice, but I have been fortunate enough to be in on a few early on. And I will say, there is no secret. The secret is go talk to people, one-on-one, face-to-face, mano a mano. You want a quick fix? I don't know what to say. If you want to do it for real, though, I can tell you, be authentic and go out and actually engage with other humans with something useful. And if it actually is, then they'll start telling you what you should do. I view myself more as like a steward or a caretaker than a leader per se, just because, a lot of the work of a project that is open source once it reaches a certain size is really about figuring out how to be the producer, not the rapper. You can have a little guest appearance on the track, but, that's not what it's about. It's about, keeping the studio flowing and everybody doing their good stuff and you appreciating that and sort of augmenting it. So there's a certain amount of ego you have to put in check to do that. I have my own projects to, TinyGo, as I said, exists for a purpose for each one of the people who use it or contribute to it. Maybe it's a different purpose. TinyGo is not a corporate open source project. does not exist. It's not a private equity open source project with venture funding. There's no TinyGo Enterprise Edition on the horizon. Probably there should be, just because, I could pay more bills. But that's not what it's about, right? This is an indie project. It's about and there are big companies using it for important things. And they have people working on TinyGo and contributing to it as a part of what they need, like Fastly, for example. So, this idea is that it's not owned by anyone. It's owned by everyone. And as long as the project is something I'm involved with, which is the indefinite future, just because it's actually doing all these great things I need and want, including a few fun stunts, like Tiny Globo, which was my high altitude Pico balloon that I made with TinyGo. A couple of years ago, every year I give a talk at FOSDEM, which is the conference of open source in Europe in Brussels, Belgium. I would call it a social anarchist technology conference, in that there's no admission. You just show up. Like, there's no registration. You just go and you try and get in line for one of the rooms. Like, I've never made it into the Rust room. Like, I've tried. I had amazing talks with people on the embedded Rust team in line, though, because they also did not get in. I get into the Go room because I give a talk. See, there's my secret. It's the only way I could cut through. Like, oh, sorry, yeah, I got to give a talk. Because I'm a terrible liar. But every year I give a talk about wireless and Go and TinyGo. But every year it's like some different frequency range. The first year was Bluetooth. Next year it was Wi-Fi. So the following year was about LoRa, which is long range radio communication. That has a range of, 7 to 10 kilometers even, used in industrial and agricultural applications. So I'd heard about these things called Pico balloons, which are high altitude balloons that are less than 250 grams of payload weight. So you do not need to file a flight plan with the FAA or any other authorities. So I read this, I'm like, oh, Pico balloon, I'm going to make a Raspberry Pi Pico into a balloon. Just because, it was in the name. I just assumed, oh, I'm a very literal person. So I built a little hand circuit wire wrapped board with a Raspberry Pi Pico, a LoRa radio, a GPS, some sensors, attached to some helium balloons, and then released it from the campus of the University of Bruxelles there in Brussels as the finale of my talk. So it flew at a height of over 4,000 meters for about 4 hours from Belgium to France before I lost contact with the balloon. People are like, oh, is that where it landed? I'm like, no, that's where the batteries died. They're like, well, how are you going to get it back? I'm like, what do you mean get it back? Like, it's like Voyager. It just keeps going. You just lose contact and you're like, yeah, it's out there somewhere. But it was a fun stunt. It was in Hackaday and some other places. But it also very much proved that the LoRa radio communication was very stable and absolutely works. So this is sometimes a thing you do that's fun. Fun is very underestimated in terms of its power to communicate information. I've done a few talks about this just because, I didn't call it the power of fun because that's like a TED talk from really pretentious people. I called it something else. Go, life, the universe, and everything go. That's what I called it. But, these are just things that are fun and get people's attention, but they also illustrate this is actually very serious hardcore technology that's been worked on by hundreds of people and vetted by some very serious people who care a great deal about not blowing up the rocket engine and other such. It's not safety critical certified yet, the way that there is a Rust compiler, Ferrocene, which is amazing work. I really respect the embedded Rust community. I think tremendous work is done there. I know Patricio had mentioned and I think, there's some collaborations on things like some of the configuration files that they're using for generate wrappers and stuff. It's kind of a false dichotomy to get into language tribalism, I think. let 1,000 flowers bloom. That's my philosophy. I'll use any programming language that helps me do a thing I'm trying to do. And it's fun. And that's how you learn. And that's what keeps life interesting, is learning in new things. So if AI takes that away, then what do we do? Like Kurt Vonnegut's novel Player Piano. When there's no longer any work to do, people are very depressed because they have no reason for being. So I don't think that's a real risk. We'll always have important things to do.
I agree. Yeah, I don't think it's a real risk either. And like when you ask most people, what would you do if you weren't working anymore? A lot of them don't really have an answer. They really don't have an answer. And I'm not saying this in a good or a bad way. I'm just saying, like, you're right. People do find purpose in their work to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you take that away from them, some people are like, yeah, I'll just watch Netflix all day. I was like, that'll last for like 2 days. And then you're gonna go out, like, you're gonna go crazy. You're gonna drive yourself crazy doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You need something to, yeah, exactly. You need something to do. And it's like, oh, well, I'll paint. I'll take up art and I'll paint. It's like, you're not gonna want to paint every day. Like, I can tell you right now.
Unless you're an artist.
Exactly. My retirement plan is getting a different job.
Right. Yeah. Or do something like at a smaller scale or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just, I think, we have this ideal of like, yeah, I'd never want to work anymore. It's like, well, but you do spend a lot of time working. And
I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
If I didn't have work, and like, this is going to give you an insight into me, I'd go mad. Like, I love work. It's so great.
No, it's fun.
So fun. And it's like intellectually stimulating. It like you interact with different kinds of people. Literally, I will never forget, my mum once told me, I've worked out what Angelica's worst enemy is. Angelica's worst enemy is free time. I was like, yes, it is. Because I'll go mad.
Yeah.
I am never bored. I get tired, tedium of some things, but boredom is a feeling I just do not know of, because there's so many things, and, you could be of service in all sorts of different capabilities and ways, but not all jobs have purpose underlying them. I think David Graeber called them bullshit jobs. And, this is a thing that, what if we could eliminate most jobs? The problem is then most people would not be able to survive, right? But also, like, during that initial anarchic, what do I do with my life? Like, if survival was taken care of, people would have an opportunity to explore and find things that give them more purpose, which could be very humble things. It could be, coaching a kid's sports team, or having a garden, and sharing the, fruits and vegetables you grow with your neighbors, because you have too many all at one time. If you have any kind of garden, you can't possibly, consume them all. You could find the pleasure of simple things as well as the pleasure in complex things. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting philosophical question that our current society is not really geared up to answer. Trying to say, universal basic income is not something I'm not an economist. I really don't know what I'm talking about. But the little bit that I've read has not been a cohesive and coherent enough replacement system, nor is there one problem with the big rewrite. Yeah, didn't you just talk about this on a recent show? The big rewrite always fails, right? Why? Well, one reason is, so let's say you're on the new team that's going to do the big rewrite. The old team hates you. They absolutely hate your guts. You're replacing us. We hate you. Help you as little as possible. Okay. Number two, all you need is the original code. You could just rewrite it. Wait, you're saying we can infer the purpose of this thing from the code from all the people who said no comments for all these years? And like, the one comment is like, do not change this line of code. So yeah, the big rewrite in technology doesn't work. Why do we as technocrats think we can do a big rewrite of much more complex human systems? I think a better approach might be, let's go ask people what they need or what their problems are. not even what they need. Just go say, what's your problem? Technology is not always the solution.
Don't go up and say to someone, "What's your problem?"
Okay.
No,
what's your problem, man?
In New York,
what's your
like,
problem?
no.
Yeah, New York. What's your problem, man?
You're probably gonna get yelled at.
Yeah, it's more like, how can I help you?
Yeah,
or what? And like
totally...
my classic example, another rant, real fast. 1 laptop per child. Anybody ever had heard of that? It was this really great concept.
I remember this
from the MIT Media Lab. Nicholas Negroponte, bunch of real geniuses in academia for sure. All right, so they're very noble, and they would we need to get all the kids in the world computers. This is before people have personal computers to a large extent. So they come up with this idea: 1 laptop per child. We're going to make these inexpensive laptops. We're going to have a hand crank so you can charge the battery. We're going to do all these things. And so they got some prototype models, and they went and they took them to places in impoverished countries, out of the way villages with very little electrical and really no internet, thinking, oh yeah, all the kids are going to learn how to program, and then they're going to change their whole economic status, and life will improve. Well, that's not what happened. In a bunch of cases, what happened was the people in the village, in one case anyway, that I read about, people in the village were really grateful. They were like, wow, these people came from the USA and they brought us this new technology, and they took it to the village elder's house, and they put it in this very careful shrine-like place where it could be admired. And you mean let the kids touch it? The kids who don't have shoes and their hands are dirty? We're not going to let them do that. So around the same time, I read another article about Maker Faire Africa. Maker Faire is this amazing event started in the Bay Area where all these people who are makers of different things, robots, drones, people who do knitting, bead making, all sorts of activities around the making of things. So they were organizing Maker Faire Africa, and they were having some type of innovation contest. And 2 of the entrants really caught my attention. One of them was a jerry can. A jerry can are the big cans that are used for carrying petrol and gas. Jerry cans were used by a lot of the women to drag water from the river to their home, because a lot of people got their water from a river. So this was a round jerry can in the shape of a wheel. That way they could fill it and they could roll it, just because it's really hard to drag a full jerry can, right? The other idea was a convection oven. It was basically a cardboard box that was painted black on the outside so it would heat up on the inside, because one of the biggest problems in this particular region was deforestation, generally being used for fuel. So this was a way to do baking of bread and also heating of the home in a way that did not exhaust precious wood and increase deforestation, which has all sorts of other ecological impacts. The primary one of which would be, if you have an agrarian commune, it directly impacts how much food you can grow and how much livestock can feed. So these are ideas from real people to solve real problems that I view as really innovative. 1 laptop per child is really innovative, okay? It's really genius. I'm not trying to criticize these folks. It's more, maybe we should go ask other, people, what do you need? What can make your life better? What's the problem you're encountering that's causing your life to be difficult? And then be quiet and listen to them, because they will probably tell us something we don't know. And then we could start to think about, what could we do to help? Well, we're never going to run out of those problems. So retirement, who needs it? I'll just keep trying to help until, that's it.
Fair enough. I do want to slightly revisit a previous conversation, we've been talking a lot about people like in the industry. We've talked about retirement. We've talked about ML, AI as professionals right now, but I'm really interested to shift focus to people who are new. Students who are thinking about studying CS, young people who are just seeing ChatGPT and playing around with it, even if they say that they don't have an interest in going into kind of the technical field. I mean, you can't get away from it. So many children just have it on their phones, or they're seeing Google summaries, AI summaries as they Google things. I'm interested to hear both of your takes on how like ML, this new technology, is impacting those people who are just entering the industry, studying CS, thinking about, do I even need to do a CS degree? Maybe I just need to focus on learning how to write really good prompts. And then I don't need to know.
Matthew, you look like something's in you. It's begging to come out. Let's hear it, my friend.
I get this question all the time, like on LinkedIn, email, socials. People are like, hey, looking for advice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I don't want to give people advice. I like helping people. I'm not someone that's going to be like, oh, I'm too important to talk to you. But like, it's hard to give advice to like 10, 20, 100 people. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
At some point, the advice is the same. And like, being with my wife, if I had to choose my wife for my career, like I'm choosing my wife all day. But like,
hello, false dichotomy alert. Hello.
yeah. And it's just like, but my career allows us to have the life we have too. So you know what I mean? You just have to think about this in holistically and make sure that you do that for yourself. Is I guess what I'm trying to say. To
Never ever defer life. Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Just don't do it.
True.
Don't defer life considered unsafe. Just gonna say that right there.
No, you're totally.
That's the quote of the episode.
Yeah. There's never been a time where I regretted like either spending that money to go on that trip with my wife or whatever, or like going to hang out with that friend that I really didn't want to get out of bed for, or I was just too busy for, but I said yes. Never regretted any of those moments, right? Those always led to some really fun interactions and experiences and memories. So yeah, don't defer life. That is a good one.
And on that very philosophical note, we are coming near to the conclusion of our wonderful conversation. As was predicted, we talked about everything and anything, and there's plenty more we could have talked about. But before we move over to a little bit of unpopular opinions, I want to make sure that there's nothing that is left unsaid that you're going to regret not having said. So these are your final thoughts moments.
So, let's see, final thoughts. If you want to help the TinyGo project, a lot of people have said, how can I help TinyGo? Well, I mean, there's a number of different ways. One is just try to use it for something. And if you run into troubles, let us know, whatever it was. There's a lot of people who would like to help you. We have a thing called the TinyGo test corpus that was originally created by Damian Grisky. It's a test corpus of various Go packages that we would like to work with TinyGo, but we don't know if they work or not because we can't test everything. So if you have your pet packages, try to see if you can use them. If not, let us know because maybe we can do something about that. We have another sub-project, which is the TinyGo security project. I've been working a lot on that myself, basically trying to improve the security story for TinyGo in all sorts of different ways. So we have a wiki page talking a bit about that. And then last but not least, you can help us financially. If you go to opencollective.com/TinyGo, you can make a contribution of any size, recurring or not. We will be very happy to take your funds and try to defer the endless ongoing costs. Then, if any of the things I've said resonate with you, if you would like me to help you professionally, for example, I am a technologist for hire, which means you can hire me, Give me your fiat currency. In exchange, I will do my very best to help you out. So you can reach me at hybridgroup.com or on the various social medias, and I am here to help. And then last but not least, it's been really great to be on the show with you all. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really do appreciate it. With all the amazing guests that you've had and all the cool things you've talked about, I appreciate you taking the time. And all you listeners, thanks for listening in. And I'll see you in the real world somewhere, I hope.
Hopefully in the not too distant future. Matthew, final thoughts? Anything you want to leave us with?
I would say we have to get Ron back on to chat more. There's so much more we can talk about. We
didn't even talk about the whole computer vision thing.
I know.
I could do a whole one of these shows just about computer vision and robotics.
We're going to lock you in on that. I'm going to lock you in on that, and it's not going to take us a year to schedule you this time.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, no specific final thoughts outside of that. It's just It's always a pleasure having Ron on and chatting with. If I guess one thing I will say is if you see Ron, if you do see Ron in the real world, or myself, or even maybe Angelica, I can't speak for everyone here, but say hi. We're social people. We like when people say hi, and we like chatting about things with people. That's how I met all of you, right? I said hello to Angelica, I said hello to Ron, and look at us now, right? We're actually chatting on a podcast, and that's one thing about the industry that I think we don't do well is keep the human in it and take advantage of that in-person time. So if you're out and about in conferences or meetups and you see someone that you want to talk to, don't waste your chance. Go say hi, and
if you're not in a conference or a meetup scenario, you can still say hi, but just tell us why you know us. Don't go up and just say hello, Angelica, because I'd probably be freaked out. Be hello, I am also a gopher. Lovely to talk to you.
But I think that was a great point about, I like to talk to people. I like to talk to you, and we've hung out. I like to hang out with new people. I just like to learn things. The hallway track, I think you talked about that. That's just about hanging out and talking to people. And any random person has probably got something super interesting to share, and they're much more comfortable speaking one-on-one than in front of a group. Well, cool. Let's just speak one-on-one or in a small group, or let's just hang out. And it doesn't have to be about technology. It could be about anything. The human part, I'm a cyborg, but, any human parts mean you're a human to me. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Good to know. Okay. We're going to pass over now to unpopular opinions. And we're going to start, Ron, with you. Do you have an unpopular opinion?
I do. So here's my unpopular opinion. Cloud native is for suckers. Run your own infrastructure. Okay, do not be a sharecropper. Be a homesteader. And that especially when it comes to machine learning. You could run models on your own machines. They could be M Series Max. They could be with found video game systems that some neighborhood kid was getting rid of. It could be on your CPU, but run your own infrastructure.
I like that.
I was going to be I'm not sure if I'm sure it'll be unpopular to some, but I think in this crowd,
all the people at the hyperscalers that were going to be hiring me are nah.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame what the hyperscalers have done to the infrastructure market. They took this beautiful hardware and they packaged it up and rented it to us. And it's kind of a shame because the hardware that you can run at home is not nearly as good as, or not even just home, the hardware you can run yourselves is not nearly as good as what the hyperscalers have. And that's actually that point of what you're saying is what drove me to Oxide, because finally you can get this hyperscaler hardware outside of renting it and you can actually own it. And I'm not trying to shill Oxide so much here, but if you do want to run hardware in your home, or in your home, Oxide's not a fit, but if you want to run big hardware in your business, we have an option for you too.
Look, I don't have enough power to run an Oxide rack at my home, but I would love to be. I'm not shilling. I don't work for Oxide, but I will totally shill. What you guys are doing is amazing, and I am a big supporter and fan.
I just love that you said it so bluntly of like cloud native stuff. Because it's one of those things where like we spent like a decade just making people believe that cloud native meant something. And then AI came along and we just kind of forgot all about cloud native things. It's really funny. And it's just kind of funny how the industry works like that. And I tend to agree. You should, the infrastructure jobs, it's kind of sad because like infrastructure jobs got like looked down on and maybe still are in a way. But like running infrastructure is so fun and it teaches you so much about the system, not even just like from an infrastructure layer, but the software layer. It teaches you how your software kind of works too, just by running software on your own infrastructure. I agree that, down with cloud native and up with homesteaded.
That was a good unpopular opinion.
Yeah,
I'm interested to see what the discussion will be. Okay, so Matthew, what's up? Unpopular opinion. I'm sure you have 5. I'm going to ask you to just give one.
The one that came up during this conversation is that I believe education should be much cheaper than what it is today. Like, I don't agree with the direction of educations being businesses more than academic places. And it shouldn't cost you like $60,000 a year to get an education. So when I was at, I think RustConf, we were talking about like, what would you do if you were retired? Or what would you like if you like, if you got a lot of money and you're retired off of that, what would you do? And my answer was I would like make education free as much as possible. I would try to like give people free education, or at least low cost education that's not ripping people off. So yeah, that's my popular opinion.
Well, I love the fact that RustConf, you're talking about what you're going to do when you retire, versus a lot of other confs where like, anybody got any job openings, so like, wow, man, that's a very nice space. And
funny.
Education must be free. Like the idea that you need to have this, cathedral of education to go to that, they're going to bless you. Like, okay, you have the magic certification. That doesn't make as much sense. But a fully distributed education where you're on your own with YouTube is maybe not the best way to actually learn things either. Although I will say there's amazing resources from like very serious universities, CMU, MIT, that have like a vast number of courses online. And there was a great series of blog posts about how to get an art degree for free, basically because the cost of a lot of art schools is about materials. And then also separate from that, the actual education. If you spend only money on materials, you can get an art degree relatively inexpensively. And, you could still go to the same museums and probably get closer because if you're looking at a picture of Guernica versus you actually go and see it, that's quite different. And this idea that education not only is very costly, but that it's, at least in the US, the only form of loan, one of the only forms of loan you cannot discharge in bankruptcy. It's basically like a modern form of indentured servitude. Yeah. So, but does that mean get rid of education entirely? No. It means make it free. Yeah. Yes. I'm with you, man.
Or at least make it like much cheaper than what it is. Because I you should pay people for it's not a zero cost to like teach people, right? It's time creating curriculums, it's time grading, it's time being with people. So like I get that there should be some cost associated with it, but it doesn't need to be that much.
All you Rust stations with your retirement funds will have plenty of time to teach computer science classes.
We'll fund it,
Plus, you'll be teaching the next generation Rust. Like, I mean, it's a virtuous circle. Like, I'll go to class.
So true. I could talk about this topic for so long. So, Angelica, please, your unpopular opinion.
I don't have one. I'm feeling very, very positive today. I think my only unpopular opinion is just a comment, which is just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that it's bad. and I mean that in specific to the topic of this podcast, is I think I understand why a lot of people have apprehension about leading into AI, ML, etc. And there are valid reasons to be apprehensive and to be worried and to have the mentality of approach with caution. But for me, my frustration is when I kind of dig a little deeper with these individuals and I go, why? Like, what is it that makes you feel apprehensive? And more often than not, it's like, oh, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand it. And it's coming from a place of not understanding as opposed to a place of like, I understand it. And here are my valid frustrations, worries, etc. So I think for me, my unpopular opinion is like, you can't dislike something if you don't understand it. Like, I don't think that's real.
I thought most people's hate was from things they didn't understand. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm talking about something else.
I mean, it's broad. I can apply that more broadly. I think a lot of the time people say, oh, I don't like this, but they don't actually understand it. If you really understand something and then you choose to dislike it, okay. But if you don't like it because you don't understand it.
See, we should have started with replacing the bosses because they're a lot easier. Right? But let's just say let's start at the bottom though. First, we replace all the factory workers. Then we replace all the programmers. Then we replace all the managers. Then we replace all the executives. Then the corporation buys its own shares back. Mm-hmm. And then what? What's left, I ask you?
AI domination. That's true. I mean, I don't know. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about things that they don't, not that they just don't understand, but they made no effort to even try.
Yeah.
They formed some opinion about something that they didn't even try to like even define or understand. And yeah, that's really frustrating. Yeah. And it happens in every facet of life, in politics and relationship and everything. Like,
agreed.
Yeah, it's.
Well, I'll give you a phrase from the second AI winter. It seems appropriate right now. Never worry about this. Why? Because natural stupidity will always be more powerful than artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And on that, wonderful, wonderful quote, we started with quotes, we're ending with quotes. I am going to draw this episode to a regretful conclusion, but we're going to get Ron back on soon because I've got the verbal commitment now.
That's right.
To talk a little bit more. Thank you very, very, very much for spending your afternoon, morning with us today. And tune in soon to hear more wonderful fall-through content or interesting fall-through content, or just tune in. Just to have in the background. It's fine. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye!
Thank you again to Ron Evans for joining us for this episode. So what did you think, viewer, listener? Did you like that whole conversation? It was a little bit of everything, but also a bit of AI. So yeah, let us know your thoughts on social media or in the comments below. This episode of Fall Through was hosted by Angelica Hill with co-host Matthew Sanabria and guest Ron Evans. Fall Through is produced by Chris Brando and Angelica Hill, and our beats are by Breakmaster Cylinder.